Hello, everyone, and welcome to BlackHat Arsenal on the C2 Matrix. I'm Jorge Orchilles.
I'm Bryson Bort.
And we're excited to do this presentation for you on a tool that we created within the last year. My name is Jorge Orchilles. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Scythe. I'm co-creator of the C2 Matrix, which we'll be talking about here. We also recently released the Purple Team Exercise Framework, so that if you're new to purple teaming or want to get into it, you can learn how to do it with a 20-page framework that shows you step-by-step how to create a purple team program. Prior to joining Scythe, I was at Citi for 10 years running the offensive security program. I also teach for SANS as a certified instructor and have a 2-day red team exercises and adversary emulation course called Security 564. I was part of the CVSS working group for version 3 and version 3.1. I wrote a framework for threat-led penetration testing with my friends at the Global Financial Markets Association. I'm an ISSA fellow and an NSI technologist fellow.
Hi, I'm Bryson. I'm also known as the Unicorn. I'm the CEO and founder of Scythe. When George and I first started working on this project together, we actually did not work together. We first met a few years prior to that, and he was one of many folks that offered a lot of feedback as we continue to refine our requirements and develop our platform at Scythe. I'm also a co-creator of the C2 Matrix. I'm the founder of GRIM, the co-founder of the ICS Village, which will be at DEF CON. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. I am a senior fellow at the R Street Institute in National Security and Cybersecurity, an advisor to the Army Cyber Institute, and then I'm also a senior fellow at the National Security Institute with George. So why did we build this? So I can still remember like it was yesterday. I was giving the last talk at the last DerbyCon last year on adversarial emulation. And what I wanted to do was find various APTs and find different open source tools to show exactly how to emulate them. So I see this as the next generation of red teaming. It's no longer just point and click to try to accomplish our goal of getting in, but let's take our threat model and actualize them into the environment to see what exactly would happen with a real threat. And needless to say, there are a lot of options. When we first started off at that lunch, George had been looking for different tools to do that in his SANS classes. And I had been trying and struggling with a lot of the tools that were available to do the same thing for my DerbyCon talk. Empire had just gone end of life. And so we realized that there was a bigger problem of how do we get our hands on a community on all of these tools that are out there, find ways to help drive identification and development of that, make it easier to use them, and then of course provide guidance on how best to use them in multiple different environments. And so what we ended up with was a compendium that the community helped drive. At the end of the day, while George and I were the ones who created this framework, it is dozens of volunteers who helped identify and really walk through explicit detail on what the capabilities are, what the communications are, how to use them. And then as we'll show in later in this demo, we'll talk through a lot of additional tools that we've released that package a lot of these for you. The idea is, all right, so when we started, I think there were 23. They're now just south of 50. I'm sure by the time that our talk here is broadcast, that number will be above 50 because that's the way that it works. There are so many folks driving so much innovation in the offensive security engagement space. It's really hard to keep up with it. So here's a great way to have a decision tool to understand what's there, what works best for you, and at the end of the day, make it easier for both red and blue teams to use it.
And that is where the C2 Matrix came in. It really just started, as Bryson said, as conversations with folks in the community that are big in the red team space, finding out what tool would replace Empire, especially in a classroom environment. That was my initial look at it. I needed a tool that was reliable, that was consistent, that students could run over and over again, and it would come back with the same results. That wasn't buggy. But as I spoke with folks in the industry, we realized that this was more of an industry issue, that there's many of them out there. Folks didn't know about all of them. Someone said one of their favorites was X, while the other one said was Y, but they didn't know about the others. So it started as a Google Sheet with these C2s listed and all the various different capabilities that each of the C2 frameworks had. From there, we said most people don't like looking at Google Sheets or Excel documents and CSVs, so why don't we make a GUI out of it? And that's where the c2matrix.com was born. And then we said, if this tool is to find the ideal C2 for the adversary you're emulating, because there is no right or wrong answer, there is no this is the best C2. It's all based on the business value that you're trying to bring. And that's very important when we do red teaming, purple teaming, and adversary emulation, because we want to bring that business value. So ask.the C2 matrix was born. And there you can go through this questionnaire that's asks you questions about various different capabilities based on what your goals and your objectives are for this adversary emulation. And it will tell you the C2s that would get you there the easiest. From there, a lot of people asked, well, do you have notes on how to install some of these C2s? Or I'm having trouble with this installation, or how do I run this? How do I deploy a payload? And that's where we use Gitbook to create the Howto.the C2 matrix, where we talk about installing various C2s, how to run them, how to deploy agents, and how to interact and emulate TTPs. Then we saw that a lot of people are having trouble installing these tools. And that's when we teamed up with SANS and created the SANS Slingshot C2 Matrix Edition virtual machine. It's a virtual machine you can download for free, and it has 8 different C2s already installed, so you can get up and testing as quickly as possible. This also lowers that barrier to entry. These tools, most of them, are free or open source. So if other folks are using it, you should be able to too, and we believe in giving back to the community. For more updates on C2 Matrix, follow us on Twitter at C2_Matrix and hashtag C2 Matrix. As we started this program and framework, we had only about 20 or so frameworks. Because the community has followed us and has contributed to this project, we now have almost 50. And that is as simple as just tagging us when someone releases a new C2 or a new version is released or something innovative comes out in this space. Let us know, and we'll try to amplify that voice and bring you on as a contributor. So to dive in, there's many ways to leverage the C2 matrix. The start is to go to the c2matrix.com. Here you have a basic website with a nice little matrix background, as you can see there. And on the top right, you have your navigation. You can find out more about the C2 matrix by clicking About. Clicking Ask will take you to the questionnaire. The documentation will take you to the Gitbook. Feedback will allow you to provide feedback about the Google Sheet, the questionnaire, the GUI, or the virtual machine. If you find any bugs or there's anything you would like to contribute, that is where you'd go. You have the GUI, which is a graphical interface of the C2 matrix. And then of course on the right, that matrix button takes you to the golden source. The GUI, as I mentioned, it's a lot prettier than a Google Sheet. It's broken up on the top by tabs about information about the C2, the code it was written in and the user interface, the various channels available, the agents and what kind of agents you can create, the capabilities, which you can see on this screen, various different capabilities of each C2, and the support for that particular C2. The golden source is the Google Sheet. You can get there by clicking on the matrix button, or you can click on this Google Doc. And it's an open doc. You can take a look and filter it if you'd like to filter it yourself. You can see over on the left, we have the name of each C2, where as of right now, we have 48 C2s documented here. You have the license information, whether they're free, commercial, or open source. You have the price. You have the GitHub page, the site for the particular C2, and the Twitter handle of the creators. All this is C2 information. Then you have C2 matrix information, such as who evaluated this particular C2. And we'd like to thank all the contributors that have provided information about this. we have the date that the evaluation occurred. We have the version that was evaluated. So do want to point out that this version is the one that the evaluator looked at, not the current version. So something like POSH C2 is accurate. The latest version is 6, and you can see that it was recently reviewed, while others might not be the latest version. Then we cover how the evaluator implemented it. A lot of these C2s can be implemented in a variety of ways, with pip, with Docker, with binaries. We covered how the evaluator did that. Then, is there a how-to page for it? This is a C2 matrix feature as well, which we'll walk you through. If it's in Slingshot, you can see 8 of those are on Slingshot. And we're also working with the offensive security folks to get these into Kali Linux. As we know, a lot of folks like using Kali. And wouldn't it be nice to just install very easily using apt? Then we have other features which we'll dive into our demo. The Ask the C2 matrix allows you to select various different questions here on the bottom. So recently we heard of this DNS vulnerability on Windows Server. So wanted to check what C2s allow us to test the DNS channel. And just by selecting DNS, it filters out and gives you the C2s that allow you to do that. The how-to is where you could get most of your information, deep dive into each of these. You can see over on the left is a screenshot of the landing page. Here you have all the various different links to the main site, the golden source, the questionnaire, how to get the virtual machine, the basic lab environment, and contact information if you'd like this Git book updated. On the left side, you also see ways to contribute, the C2 Matrix Edition, setting up lab infrastructure, and then all the C2s that we've documented. On the right is an example of one of these pages. This is for Empire. As we mentioned, Empire was end of life, but it's now maintained by a group called BC Security. So we have that information here. You can see that content, and a lot of it you can just copy and paste so that you can get up and testing as soon as possible. Realizing that a lot of these C2s are difficult to install and very difficult to install multiple of them on the same system, we worked with the folks at SANS, with Ryan O'Grady, and other C2 Matrix contributors to create and lower the learning curve of using these C2s, right? These are free C2s that anyone can get from GitHub. So let's make it easier for our audience to grab that information and use it. So it comes pre-installed with 8 different C2s. You can see the list here on the left. And it also brings a tool that we love called Vector. Vector is not a C2. Vector is a tool that allows you to track and report on red team and purple team engagements. On the right, you see the screenshot of the Slingshot and a LS of all of the various different tools that come with that Slingshot. If you'd like to contribute, there's a page on the Git book that tells you how to contribute. There's many different ways to contribute. You can just tag us on Twitter or use the hash C2 matrix whenever a new C2 is released. Or if someone posted a blog on how command and control works, how a server works, or any updates, if you've evaluated a new C2, if you have a new detection capability for a particular C2, any and all of that would be helpful. Again, it's a community project. While Bryson and I created the framework, it's really open to anyone to contribute, and we really appreciate you giving back to the community. And lastly, of course, we have the feedback page. Here, you can go on the c2matrix.com, hit feedback, and you can report a bug on the virtual machine, maybe request a tool if you want a particular C2, you think it would work on that Slingshot VM. If you have a question, if you have feedback on the website, we really appreciate it. Again, it's a community project, so any and all feedback is appreciated.
Yeah, it's really worth emphasizing. This was a framework that we created to help harness the community to understand this all together. And so when we talk about contributing, I mean, there's the base level of maintaining the data on what we're already tracking. There's the additions of the new things, but those are all within the current framework. we have an idea about the roadmap of where this can go, though. So what if there were ways to automatically generate detection? What if we could create a community available range that these would be available in for different kinds of automated testing and practice? And so those are just a few examples of some things that we have. We are completely open to ideas and, of course, help on implementing those so that we can take where this framework can go technically to a much deeper and more powerful level.
Excellent. So let's jump into a demo. So we can get started at the c2matrix.com. Here's the website that has all the links I just went through. Now, the matrix is where I like to start. This is the Google Sheet, also known as our golden source. It's our golden source because it's what we can update the quickest whenever something new occurs. So let me dive in and go through all of these fields so you know which ones we are covering here. In this case, we can choose something like Posh C2 to use as our example. As you can see, there's many of these C2s there, and we're going to go along through row 2. So the first few fields are the C2 info. I covered those earlier in the GUI. And then we have the C2 matrix info, which is the evaluators, when it was evaluated, the version that was evaluated, how it was implemented, the how-to, if there is a how-to, and of course we're trying to build more and more of these, if it's available on the Slingshot VM, and if you can install it, and if it will come on Kali Linux. If we go here to the right, we start seeing other fields. For example, the language and the code that is used for that particular C2. Generally, C2s have a C2 server, and then they have payloads or implants that get deployed. So the server-side code can be one thing, and the agent could be another. So we can look through here and see the various different options. You see a lot of Python servers, and then the agents are created and the language in various different languages. You see some PowerShell, some Python, some Go, some C#, things like that. Then the user interface. The user interface is where the red teamer will use this particular tool, where they will control their agents. The first question is it multi-user? This is important if you're running a red team, because generally you have more than one person, right? It's in the name, red team, right? There's at least more than one. So can multiple people log in to this particular server and interact with the agents? That question is the first one we look at. Then we cover the user interface. Is it a command line interface, a graphical user interface, or a web interface? Then does it have an API? As we try to automate things, especially repetitive things, we like seeing C2 servers that have APIs. That way we can add it to our automation and be able to interact with it without having to use the user interface. Agents. These are what get deployed. Now we looked at 3 types: Windows systems, Linux, and Mac OS. Yes, there are some C2 servers that will create, say, a Android binary, but we didn't look at that. We focused on the main things that we attack as red teamers, and those are Windows systems, Linux systems, and Mac OS. You can see here a lot of Windows systems, a few Linux, and a few Mac. But really, it's based on what you're up against. This is where your recon is going to come in. Make sure that you use a C2, that you can create agents for your target systems. The channels. This is the communication channel that will be used by the C2. TCP is your basic TCP connection, not using anything on the application layer. HTTP is the most common, as you can see here. It's also the most common used by malware. So a lot of times you'll use HTTP. But what about all the other channels? You should probably test those too. So there's things like HTTP2 and HTTP3 that you might be running if you're running the latest web browsers in your organization. DNS, that's the one that came up last week because of the Windows DNS server vulnerability. Are we looking at our DNS traffic? We should. And to test that, you can use one of these C2s. DNS over HTTPS is a newer protocol that browsers are also enabling, so you might want to check your visibility there. And then we have some other protocols such as ICMP, FTP, IMAP, MAPI, and SMB. Number of different ones. You look through there and choose the one that you need. Then we look at the capabilities of each C2, and these are important. The first one is key exchange. If the protocol does not offer encryption and you're sending everything in clear text, you don't want to be sending all your C2 information, right? Because what do you do once you get access? You may be grabbing credentials or grabbing sensitive information. You want to have operational security. So regardless of the channel, you are going to want to have some sort of key exchange between your agents and your servers so that someone doesn't do a malicious person in the middle or take over your agents or your server. So here we look at those various different encryption types. We look at the use of steganography. Now, this is the ability to hide things in images. You may argue that this is more of a channel, but we think it's more of a capability. So we've added it here. Is it proxy aware? As you know, many enterprises use proxies to access internet sites. So if you are up against a target that uses a proxy, you'll have to use a C2 that's proxy aware. The ability to do domain fronting. This is a common technique. It's documented in MITRE ATT&CK. And if you need to be able to do that, you can look at this field. Custom profiles. That allows you to modify how the communication is occurring between your agents and your server. Things like changing the user agent would fall in here, changing the host header, kind of domain fronting, kind of custom profile, and being able to change other things like signatures and whatnot. Then do we allow jitter? Most of these C2 frameworks, I would argue probably all of them, maybe with the exception of Metasploit on here, are an agent that makes calls out to the servers. That call out is done at a certain interval. We often call that a beacon. And if you do it at a same interval, say 50 seconds, that is a very easy pattern to spot. So many of these C2s implement what's called a jitter, which modifies that pattern to not be exactly every 50 seconds. It's generally a percentage. Working hours. Working hours are for the agent only to call back during, say, 9 to 5 on the target system. This is a feature that we haven't seen much. We've only actually seen this in Empire, and it continues to be in Empire 3. Kill date. The kill date's important because if you lose access to your C2 server or it gets blocked by the target system, then you want your agent to stop calling out. You can do that by setting a kill date. Chaining. Now, many different people call this different things. We put chaining. Posh C2 calls it daisy chaining. Folks call it pivoting. It's really about using an agent within the target environment to pivot through. So instead of having all the systems going out directly to your C2 server, you have them going through this particular system. Other people call this a beachhead. That is what we tried to explain here as chaining, and you can see which C2s allow that. Logging. Logging is very important. We want to know at what time everything occurred without having to manually write all that down. This is very important if we're measuring and trying to improve and show how the red team or purple team has improved security. Logging is pretty important. And then is there MITRE ATT&CK mapping? You can see some of these are mapped. The mapping, unfortunately, has occurred because malicious actors have used this in real attacks, and that's how they end up in the MITRE ATT&CK website. We're looking for ways to do this mapping and track it somewhere else in the event that they haven't been used for malicious purposes. And is there a dashboard when you log in? Can you see all the campaigns you're running? Can you see all your C2 servers, your agents, etc.? Then we've added a section on detection. We did this presentation, Bryson and I, at Art into Science, a conference on defense. And what we realized is that this C2 matrix isn't just for those doing offense and doing red team engagement. It's also for blue teams to take these C2s and test them against their organization and see if they can capture it. We've had various contributors, in this case, Lee, who is a consultant with RSA, has been writing up how to detect some of these with NetWitness, which is a commercial tool. I believe they have a free version, but these are the things that we talk about. That if you have an idea, let us know and contribute. Detection is definitely a big one for us. The last thing here on the right is support. We want to know if that C2 is actively maintained. Is there a Slack channel where we can go and ask questions? The last few fields, Slack members and GitHub issues, this was added to see if there was a way to determine which C2 is the most popular, because we get that question a lot. People ask, what is your favorite C2? And it's a hard question to answer because there's multiple favorites. It really depends on what we are trying to do. What are our goals and our objectives? So I tried to find a data-driven method of determining which is the most popular. So that's a quick walkthrough of the golden source. There's other features here, such as Ask the Matrix. Here, you see a list of all the C2s, and you have questions down here. Do you need a C2 that supports multiple users or has an API? And you can select various different ones, and you will see they filter out as you go. What channel do you want to use? You select something like this, you'll get very limited results. And you can go on and answer questions. You can leave things blank. So if it doesn't matter what OS, but I need proxy aware and Stego, or if I need custom profiles, if I need jitter, if I need domain fronting, you can do all of these, and you see how, as you ask the matrix, different answers come about. So in this case, let's look at Mac and proxy aware. We see we get very limited results there as well. The documentation, this is where it is a Git book on howto.thec2matrix.com. You have information about that. Here's also where you get information on the SANS Slingshot C2 Matrix Edition. So you can download this for free on SANS Slingshot C2 Matrix Edition, and we walk through how to import it. It is a VMware machine. There's also a video here of me doing the install, as well as the frequently asked questions and how to do various different things. I'll show you that shortly. How to contribute. This is the page I showed earlier. Please do contribute. Any ideas you have, we're happy to hear them. Then setting up a lab infrastructure. We show the lab that was used for this particular testing. We had a pfSense firewall with different zones. We had the attacker zones and the victim zones. That way we can see the traffic a little better. We can get span ports. We can send them to other detection type of solutions. And here is a video on how to set that up, how to set up the Windows victim with Wireshark and Sysmon and things like that. So lots and lots of resources, how to set up a basic lab, virtual machines with C2s, how to use Docker, and other resources. Then we have the various different C2s, which is where really it's a lot of notes. So I think on the screenshot had showed Empire. Here we have a video of using Empire, as well as how to use Starkiller, which is its graphical user interface, and how to emulate some of these particular threat actors. In this case, this is APT19, which was a Threat Thursday over at scythe.io. That covers the cyber threat intelligence and gives you this adversary emulation plan to see what you're going to emulate, and then walks through how to do the emulation. So a lot of these you can just copy and paste into your systems. More resources on attack infrastructure and detection are over here on the left. So plenty of things there to look at. The feedback form I mentioned here, you can give us feedback, just fill out the form. And just real quick, let me show you the Slingshot virtual machine. It's VMware. This is the latest version, which came out in May. And you log in with Slingshot. So that is the most asked question. What is the password? This password is Slingshot. It's in the frequently asked questions as well. And if you CD here to /opt, and you look at what's there, you see it comes with a number of tools because Slingshot is its own virtual machine. So it has a lot of those tools. And on top of that, it has 8 different C2s that you can install and run, or well, that you don't have to install, that you just have to run, which lowers the learning curve there. So this takes us to the end of our demo. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that you find the C2 matrix valuable, and of course, try to contribute if you can.